So hello, today I'm at All Saints Church in Terling in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Terling is a village in Essex. It's just over 4 miles from Great Lees and 3.7 miles from Hatfield Peveril. The village is surrounded by Essex farmland, and we've got narrow twisty lanes. It's a fairly isolated place. The elevation is around 32 metres and the population is 700 thereabouts. The driving to Terling gave me the impression I was following some ancient road networks. It's an ancient place, for sure. In 1824, a Mr. James Talbot found 2 gold rings close to Terling Place and a hoard of Roman, gold and silver coins. The state labourers were laying a new drive and unearthed Roman clay pots containing the hoard. The estate steward said, "The rings are in perfect and nice, as if they came this minute out of a trinket box. The men did not give all they found up to me." I find now they sold some few for 6p on Saturday. And it didn't end there. In 1898, the 35th century coins were ploughed up in Terling, so we can be sure that a Roman settlement and possibly even a villa were located here. Terling, the name, originates from Terlinges, first mentioned in 1017, meaning simply Terling's people. Now, the first mention of Saxon occupation was in 627 AD, when 500 acres of land were titled. Now, in this year of 627, Sigebert the Little was king, and he was succeeded by Sigebert the Good. And Terlinges at that time was part of the kingdom of the East Saxons. Now, by 1066, 2 manors were here. Aylmer the Milk was the thane, and he owned 8 other manors in Essex. Edward the Confessor was the overlord. The manor was also part owned by Ely Abbey. Now, the manor itself had 11 smallholders, 5 villagers and 1 freeman. And these were made up of plough teams and livestock, including 180 pigs, 50 goats and 12 cattle. Now, the second manor was much smaller, having just 20 pigs. Now, when the Normans took over Terling by 1086, Richard was the lord of the manor and Ranulph Peveril was the tenant-in-chief. Interestingly, 2 mills were mentioned. The River Ter still flows through here now. Now, Ranulph Peveril would marry Angelica, said to be the mistress of William the Conqueror himself. Now, Angelica would end her days in a religious college she founded, perhaps seeking forgiveness for her early days. Their son, William Peveril, would convert this college into a Benedictine priory. Now today's Terling Manor would then pass on to, and you won't believe this, Robert de Bruce. That's the father of Robert the Bruce, who would give Scotland its independence. This was today made famous in the film Braveheart. Now Robert de Bruce owned lands in Writtle near Chelmsford, 4 miles away in Hatford Peveril also, and here in Terling. Was likely was born on the family estate in Writtle in Essex. And you can see the font in Writtle's church, where he was christened in 1243. After his son Robert the Bruce became King of Scotland in 1306, Terling and all the Essex manors went back to the crown. Now it would be the Bohun family who would inherit Terling next. Now from 1227 the Bishop of Norwich purchased much land in Terling and built a new manor here. Bishop William of Middleton would visit Terling in 1278. He was described as clerk to the King Edward I, and he would die here on his last day in August. Now by 1331, Terling would be granted its weekly market each Thursday, held at the Bishop's Manor House here. The Bishop of Norwich would also build a palace here, where today's Terling Place stands today. Now in 1534, Henry VIII himself would exchange Terling's palace and the manor house with a monastery, and for the next 2 years Terling became a royal manor. The King of England would reside here on and off. Now on the 1st of January 1534, Henry VIII gave out his customary New Year's presents. One of the recipients was Mistress Seymour. Now Jane Seymour would become Henry's third wife in 1536. And who knows, they may well have spent their honeymoon right here perhaps. Now the churchwardens of Terling's church made notes in the church register of all major events when its 5 bells were rung, and here are some of those. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution, when the Catholic King James II was overthrown, his Protestant daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William of Orange would take over on the 14th of February 1688. In 1704 the bells were rung when Admiral Rooke beat the French at Malaga in Gibraltar. Admiral Rooke was aged 54 when he also sank the entire Spanish treasure fleet 2 years before in Vigo Bay. The church records also list a man called Matt Sheepy, for in 1697 Matt was taken from Terling to the House of Correction. In the next year Matt was chained, and in 1703 it read, October the 2nd, for 3 years quit rent for the house where old Sheepy died. Now the Strutt family were unusual in many ways. On rent collection day the Strutts would invite the tenants around, following an eyewitness account. Gives them an elegant dinner, plenty of wine, punch. We dined in a fine larger room, 50 in number, Mrs. Strutt and one son at one table, and Mr. Strutt and the other son at another table. A sight pleased me much. We spent a cheerful day, 1st of January 1784. Now, it was also said that John Strutt himself would defy the latest fashion and walk around Terling wearing a pigtail from an earlier period. John's successor was John Holden Strutt. He too became an MP for Malden, and when he married Lady Charlotte Gertrude, the daughter of a duke, she became Baroness Rayleigh in 1821. And it is this title that passed on to John's son James, and so the Strutts became the Rayleighs. So now we're looking upon the Congregational Chapel of 1753. Now Terling was a stronghold for non-conformity during the reign of Elizabeth I. Now, during this time, the Mildmay family were lords of the manor here and were non-conformist. Now, along with All Saints Church, which is behind me, Reverend Thomas Weld, now, due to immense pressure from the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Protestant Church, many priests such as Reverend Weld had departed for Holland and then America. In 1632, the Reverend Weld and his family had arrived in Massachusetts, America. Remember, this was only 12 years after the Mayflower ship had sailed with the Puritan pilgrims. Now, Terling continued being non-conformist, the villagers even converting a new vicar. By 1740, non-conformists no longer had to worship in secret here, their new headquarters being at Owls Hill, Terling. Now, in 1752, land was purchased off Church Green, right where we stand now, and this splendid Georgian chapel was then built. 25 ministers have served the congregation of Terling, connected to this chapel. From Thomas Weld of 1624 to Paul Ellis in 2016, that's almost 400 years later, the final service was held here on Mothering Sunday on the 26th of March 2017 by the Reverend Paul Riddle. Today's chapel is now a private dwelling. In the centre of Terling we have the village store and post office. In 1769 it was the Angel Inn, and William Palmer was the landlord. And it does have an inn look about it even now. I read it dates from the 15th century with a central hall and cross wings. Notice the cut out recess on the corners, I'm guessing to avoid wagons clumping the structure. Now, Terling's main pub, the Rayleigh Arms, but known locally as the Monkey, was built in 1840 to house the additional guests of the Strutt family. A fascinating tale connected to the Monkey, the coat of arms was granted in 1821 to the Baron Rayleigh. Now, Joseph Strutt would marry Charlotte Fitzgerald. The Charlotte's family and of ancient Irish ancestry. 800 years ago, a fire raged at the family home in Woodstock Castle in Ireland. Their pet monkey rescued baby John Fitzgerald, and the Fitzgeralds honoured the monkey bravery by adding it to the family crest. Now John Smith must be mentioned, for he was brewing his own beer from here in 1855. John was also running a post office and he was a farmer. In 1923 the Rayleigh Arms would be sold to the Incoop. And I read today's landlady is a talented comedian performing in London with a show called Menopause Party. Now today's pub also sells flavoured gins from the famous Tiptree Jam Factory, not far from here. This is the old Ford for Terling. Just came across this petition sign. It's exactly the same pylon system that's running across the fields near where I live, in Gatestone Hall. That will definitely change the countryside. Terling's old windmill. Now this old windmill, originally built in Cressing in the 1700s, was built to crush bark. Then in 1830 was hoisted up onto carts and dragged 4 miles through the narrow twisty lanes. And if you think this is not possible, well, in Stock Village 2 windmills were also moved on carts this way. Now the mill was converted to crush grain and would do so until 1950, when sadly the miller, Mr. Herbert Boner, was tragically killed in an accident at this mill. There's been 5 millers since moving to Terling, including Herbert's son Martin. This whole mill even starred in a comedy film from 1937 called Oh Mr. Porter. It's about the railways. Now we're facing the village hall. In 1959, Terling's villagers built their own village hall, and all in their spare time. Now that is impressive. Now Terling has its own charity-run swimming pool, run by the community for the community. Reminds me of the village of Stebbing, which runs its own community store, run by volunteers. Terling's pool was actually built by the community in the late 1960s. So now we're standing in front of All Saints Church itself. Now the walls are of flint rubble and the dressings are of limestone and clunch, which is a hard chalk. Now we're standing at the north porch, which is a Victorian built structure from 1849. So let's have a closer look at these door straps made in iron. Now if you look closely you can see the crosses which are to ward off evil spirits. And this dates way back to the medieval period. So we should go in. Put my cap down. If we pan around we can see what it looks like going through the north door. Just having a closer look at its Victorian period door. It's just made of such quality. So when you enter the church you've got the various information booklets and the visitor's book. And if we pan around there's a display here which goes into local information on the church itself. Now we're going to start off in the centre in the nave itself. So the nave measures 47 feet by 24 feet. And the nave itself has 4 bays on the north side. Now these are from 1849. Notice a different colour to the south bay, which are 15th century. So we should pan around. But it's a good set of imitation octagonal piers. So now we shall make our way down past the seating area. So now we're looking at the pulpit itself. And if you look, this pulpit is supported by a single prop of carved, I'm guessing oak. It's Victorian in period. That could be another wood. So just to the side of the pulpit we have the lectern, which is 1905 and would make it Edwardian. It's made to commemorate the coronation of Edward the VII. No, I think this is a lectern. As usual, I always get it mixed up. You can see the amount of work's gone into this. I thought we should take a go up the steps of the pulpits. A quite unusual design. Now, the lectern originates from the Latin lecternarium, which means lessons. This dates back to the time of Moses, when the scriptures were read out. We shall walk over to the north aisle, where we walked through in the beginning. So the north aisle was also built in 1849, and it mirrors that of the south aisle, which is 15th century. We can just pan around to see that. So if we look at the first memorial window, now this plain window is dedicated to Fred Thurgood, 1983. Now Fred was a gamekeeper here at Lord Rayleigh's estate. Fred also left money to local charities. And you could just make out the pheasant there. If we continue down, we are faced with a tapestry. Now this wonderful tapestry is designed by Linda Rondell. It's embroidered by the ladies of Terling and Fairstead. Excuse me. It shows both parish church buildings and the social facilities attached. It must have been a lot of fun making it. And below that there's a board with the Easter lilies in memory of. And we come across the first ancient memorial slab. I've got no details of this. This is next to the tapestry. Now just above that we've got another memorial window which is also plain. This window is dedicated to Thomas Howard, 1930, and his daughter, or his seventh daughter, Jessie, 1971. So I've found a board that explains what the lilies of dedication are for. So we're now at the east end of the aisle itself. Now we notice that there's some amazing poppy displays that are hand embroidered by volunteers in this community to remember the fallen of World War I and World War II. And they continue here, quite incredible. If we pan around, we can see further displays of poppies, which would be on the south door for the original south entrance. So then we're now looking at the south aisle, which is 15th century and it's 15 feet wide. Now the Rochester family themselves would commission this aisle. Now if we pan around, there's a picture of Jesus with children. There's a baptism roll to the right, and to the left, the vicars of Terling. Now the first documented vicar was Edmund de Eppingharp of 1322. Now in this year of 1322, Ely's Cathedral Tower falls during the night of the 12th of February. In this year also, Edward II defeats rebel barons, and Robert de Bruce of Scotland defeats the English forces in Yorkshire. Look at the incredible dates. We should pan back round to this amazing font. Now this is a very early English 13th century font. It's made in Purbeck marble, expensive at the time to construct. It has an octagonal bowl with two pointed arches on each face. Now inside, the rim has been damaged and repaired, and the bowl has a deep score mark. And if we could go back in time, we'd like to know what happened. It'd be fascinating. I won't take off the poppies to have a closer look. And as you can see, it rests on 8 modern columns. Now the memorial cover, the cover itself to the fonts is a memorial to Beth and George and Richard from 1956 to 1994. Now we should make a short distance away. We've got a memorial book. Now this book remembers all those that never came back from the wars, and you can look through this and it lists all these soldiers, and each page goes into their life and where they ended their days. It's very interesting reading. Like I say, a lot of work has gone into this from this community. Now if we pan around, we've got a further board. Now this board goes into detail of the soldiers that never returned. Now if we make our way down to the east side, we have memorials to the Rochester family. Now I'm going to make a separate video on this because it's too much to include in one video. But this memorial here shows William Rochester kneeling in civil dress with his wife Elizabeth Newton and their 6 sons and 4 daughters. But if you look closely, William has got 2 wives and more children. We have to come back to this because it's quite detailed. But below shows the original brass, and if we pan up, we can see a brass rubbing. Now these are very popular during the Victorian period, and some churches allow you to take brass rubbings, but you have to check with each church. So here we have a magnificent organ. Now this is by Henry Jones of London. Henry built small to medium-sized organs. He was born in Folkestone in 1822. His father was a cabinet maker. Now Henry was apprenticed as an organ builder in Tottenham Court Road. The Henrys themselves, they built 306 organs. His last was built in 1894, destroyed in the Blitz in World War II. Now when he died in 1900, it was written, "A kinder, more straightforward man we have never yet to find." Now we've moved up towards the West Tower and we can look for mason's marks. So you can see that we've moved away from the south aisle and now we're facing the West Tower itself, or the wall of it. So the doorway we're actually looking at is 1340, and the door jambs have 15th century graffiti. You can see that part of this has been restored, but you can clearly see where the original part, the jambs are. The dog bowl there, looks of it. The dog's thirsty. Oh, you can see. And an interesting door as well, with recesses cut out of it. So just to the left of the door itself is a painting by David Rolt, 1951, in memory of Captain Rolt, killed in action in 1945. Now the door itself is oak boarded with battens and iron straps, and it's 15th century. Around the time of the graffiti. So now we can go in underneath the West Tower itself. So the West Tower above us, or side of us, was built in 1732. The east wall we're looking at now is the oldest part, it's 13th century. Like I say, the doorway is about 1340. Now, 2 years before 1730, the 13th century tower actually collapsed, and Anthony Gould was the mason and designer here. Now, if we look up in the bell ceiling, we can see it looks like where the bell ropes would have originally come down. The wall itself is really interesting because there's various memorials and graffiti as well on some of the bricks. And it also goes on to say that this spire was destroyed by lightning and the windows suffered much damage from enemy action during World War II. And above that, we can see some graffiti. In a time when they put more effort into their handwriting. And there's a more modern plaque. So again, repairs in 2018, in part paid by the Heritage Lottery Fund. I've just found an ancient piece of graffiti, which is on the jamb. Now we should look at the chancel itself. So the chancel measures 34 by 20 feet. It's considered the original 13th century. And until the 1880s, there would have been a ceiling here, which was then removed. And you can see incredible, well-preserved ceiling joists. Now you noticed on the north and south walls, there's a lot of memorials to the Strutt family, but I'll have to do those another time because they're most detailed. And the most interesting family. So we should make a way down. We'll talk about this hatchment. Now this is the funeral hatchment for the 4th Baron Rayleigh and his lady wife Hilda Strutt. Now if I'm not mistaken, on the left hand side is the deceased, which would be the Baron, and on the right, which is light in colour, will be his wife, which is still living. And you can see the monkey just as on the pub. Rayleigh Arms. Now if we pan around, we're now looking at the high altar area, and we're now looking at the rear. We're looking at the reredos, which is marble and alabaster. Now this was dedicated by Richard Strutt to his wife. The statue is by Norwegian artist Thorvaldsen. Now, Bertel Thorvaldsen was born in Norway in 1770. His father was an island woodcarver. His father would educate him. His talent was quickly recognised, and at just 11 years of age, Bertel attended the Royal Academy of Arts. Now, Thorvaldsen would work in Rome, Malta and Copenhagen. He's world famous. Just look at these beautiful flowers. And we've got a lovely set of 1700 communion rails, beautifully moulded rail and seal with turned and twisted balusters. I just noticed the window out of this view in the north window in the chancel. I just wonder if Henry VIII himself looked out this very window. There's the old manor house itself. Now we shall make our way outside. So the tower was built in 1732 by Andy Gould, and the north and south walls are of Flemish bond, and the style is not native to Flanders in Holland, but it originates from northern countries such as Poland, and it was used in the medieval period. Now, Flemish bond spread quickly in the 17th century in England, and notice the black headers and red stretchers making a diaper pattern. Now if you look at the corners or the coins, they're made of Portland stone. They come from Dorset in England. Now Portland stone is used much in London, St Paul's Cathedral and Buckingham Palace. Now we're looking at the west side of the West Tower. You can see the huge amount of Portland stone. So you'll see in this cemetery is quite a lot of yew trees, common English yew. There's another yew tree there. Now bells in this old church, we've got 8 in total, 1623 by Miles Gray I, known as the Prince of Bell founders, and there would be 3 generations all called Miles Gray. The Gray foundry was in Colchester, and the oldest city, it's the oldest city in Essex and England, if I'm not mistaken. Now we also have an 1810, an 1863, a 1923 and a 1927, but I've got no information on these bells. Now a 6th bell was added in 1961 by Charles Strutt, the military man, to honour the birth of his son John. John is now Lord Rayleigh of today's Terling and the 6th Baron. The 7th and 8th bells were donated in 1969 in memory of Gerald Murray and Rhoda Strutt by the British Friesian Cattle Society. In the year 2000, the bell chamber was moved upwards and created the usable space we saw earlier. Now let's just look more closely at this south porch. It's 15th century. That's an incredible age. Now the roof is all original. It's got 2 king post trusses and moulded central purlin with trussed rafters. And from the original exit, the light is beating us now, but we can still catch a bit with this phone. This would be the chancel. Now, I believe this is a private vault from the 18th century. So All Saints Church carry out baptisms, weddings and funerals, and are very active within the community. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.